Now, we haven't talked about classical, and I'm not enough of an expert, but to be fair, most of the classical music I listen to could probably be categorized as horror music. Horror movie soundtracks are based on ideas that romantic composers tapped into. It's fundamentally unnerving to hear really intense low sounds, any intense dissonant sounds, high-pitched tremolo. But yeah, classical music has been doing horror music for about 200 years.
I was going to say, In the Hall of the Mountain King is a scary song.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Anything called Dance of Death, Tontines by Franz Liszt, Danse Macabre, Camille Saint-Saëns, some of the best shit.
Fly the Bumblebees isn't scary. It's like anxiety inducing, which is like,
I mean, that is a fear response.
Really?
It's a similar deal with In the Hall of the Mountain King of it speeds up in pace as it goes.
And the chromatic notes, there's a tension that comes with dissonance. Beyond descriptions of horrific things or let's say soundscapes that evoke things that are scary, like the sound of chainsaws, the sound of tapping on your headphones. What ways have people evoked fear with music?
I'm not sure if this is what you were on, but the artist Sudden Death, his music is just scary sounding. They're instrumentals. They don't use like any of those sounds. They don't use like real world sounds. But it's just this like bass filled, it's honestly contrast that often sparks, at least to me, a lot of, wait, no, because that doesn't even work, because a lot of EDM works off contrast.
I'm going to push back on the Sudden Death example, because for me, what Sudden Death does that works well is, like, EDM is sort of a blank slate by nature. It's designed to produce an intense experience. And then what kind of experience that is gets dictated by the visuals. Sudden Death wears the deer,
antlers.
Skull
I will
mask.
clarify, I'd heard Sudden Death before I saw what the aesthetic was. I mean, even the name Sudden Death, I guess, automatically gives this energy.
Like, the experience you get is also characterized by the kinds of samples they use, the song titles.
You really think you can stop? Oh, wait, no, that's Hermaeus. Never mind.
Hermaeus horror on the brain. Your band is, would it be technically under horrorcore?
You mean my personal side project? Yeah, the ZAC project. The Zach
Zizzy
Strum,
Z.
Zizzy Z, ZAC, you know me, if you know what I'm saying.
What?
Strumbo, the strumbologist.
Over in America, over the sea. Yeah. It's not horrorcore because I can't be a white dude with dreads that's doing horrorcore because that's just way too cheesy. But back to why I'm wrong about Sudden Death.
I don't think you're wrong.
He is wrong, though.
Jesus Christ. My personal opinion is that he's not wrong, and you can't convince me.
Yeah, it's kind of 2 against 1 now.
To be fair, like, Sudden Death would count as horror music because it's not that it's music about horror. The nature of EDM is to, again, create an intense experience, and the samples, the song titles, the visuals color that experience to whatever they want. And Sudden Death is really good at coloring the non-representative, asignifying force of sound into something that's freaky and gives people bad trips.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing about, like, something about a specific part of one song, I want to say it's Behemoth. Just like, quah, 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 quah. And that almost gives the energy of a, at least to me, giant robot stomping with a air raid siren going in the background. But those are also like preconceived things I have of like, yeah, I don't want a giant robot stomping around me. And also, if there's an alarm going off, that's probably bad. So I don't know if that's like what you're talking about, but it's hard to analyze that from a place of no preconceived notions because as we were ranting about downstairs before we started this, the only 2 responses are like biological and learned, or evolutionary and learned. Biological is different, like the brown note. We didn't evolve for that.
Well, that's also kind of the thing about evolution is a series of happy accidents. None of our processes are like any sort of force thinks, okay, low intense sounds tend to indicate large predators or earthquakes, whatever the current leading theory is. But it just so happens that the people who are more put on edge by these low sounds tend to survive better.
It's like how I'm able to be in the bathroom at work and hear the sound of the door opening at the front. It reverberates throughout the room.
It's not that you learn that the sound of the door opening means people are coming in. It's that the people who don't know the sound of the door opening is people coming in get fired. Mm-hmm. That's how evolution works.
Yes.
What's the original question?
Is there a God?
Okay.
Yes, but he hates us.
I think that was like the original question.
Well, yes.
I will at least pitch my 2 cents on this subject. There's two aspects of sound. Both are always present. One is that it makes you feel some kind of way. No further questions. Tritone makes you feel some kind of way. Tense, on edge. That's universal across cultures. The music that uses tritones, like the blues, like metal, it uses it for the adding a little bit of edge to music to enhance expression. The second way sound works, and again, this is always present, is that it represents something. It allows you to draw an inference about the outside world. And so there is a representative aspect to it, but that's not essential to the meaning of the sound. You can use that in EDM, in doom metal, just to create atmospheres that are non-representative, but still create this sensation that maybe at one point had an evolutionary origin.
I also think there's a weird thing about man-made sounds. So think of the sound of a woodpecker on a tree. Very different than a jackhammer. Woodpecker and a jackhammer are doing the same thing, essentially. Jackhammer has these sub-frequencies and this resonation with a familiar pattern that you're not used to and is not a natural sound. Like a woodpecker isn't going to piss you off in the morning that much. A jackhammer really is. And it's not a case of just the sound being louder, because if you amplify a woodpecker, it's not going to sound like a jackhammer. And so that's why, like, to me, it's really weird how we know what industrial sounds are and what natural sounds are. It's pretty easy to tell the difference. Like a drill. There's not really a thing in nature. I mean, there definitely someone's going to be like, oh, well, technically this animal makes a sound.
Birds that hear drills make sounds like drills. Shout out to those parrots who make chainsaw noises.
They're badasses, and I want them as a singer in my band.
Oh, shout out to parrots who scream bloody murder and then get the cops calling their owners.
I've seen that. Yes.
And now, the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
Maybe that's a reason why Nine Inch Nails is horrorcore question mark. They have some songs that aren't, the lyrics aren't necessarily horror. The beat and the sound like is horrific.
They frequently have some pretty terrifying soundscapes.
Yeah,
That's why I wouldn't put them as horrorcore necessarily.
I would put them as
industrial.
the reverse of horrorcore.
Yeah.
And maybe this is where we can get into the genre discussion, because the trend I've been noticing through this conversation is, so first off, metal has some inherently horrific aspects, let's say.
Yeah.
It's got the intense sound, intense low frequency, frequent use of tritones, minor seconds that, because of their complexity, just put people on edge.
Yeah.
In combination with screamed vocals, there's something very primal about the sound of a scream that's evolutionarily hardwired to be put on edge, because the sound of a person screaming is a sign of something's fucked up.
Pain.
Yeah, all metal music is to some extent a little bit disturbing, but it's also very easy, because this is kind of the thing about these horror reactions is you can learn and unlearn preconscious responses. Listening to a lot of metal music, it gets you used to it. And this is also how trauma works, is it teaches you new horror responses.
Metal is like trauma.
Metal is the opposite of trauma.
Metal is healing.
That's why so many traumatized
Now,
people
that is
listen to
true.
metal.
That I was gonna say, like, yeah, that is a lot of, I don't know a metalhead that has not been through trauma. I know, like, in reality there is quite a bit, but in my circle, everyone's traumatized by one thing or another. That may have not led them to metal music, but suspiciously they are into metal music.
I think everybody's has trauma and is traumatized in some way. It's just metalheads are more open to talk about it because they've been indoctrinated by the music to understand, like, oh, it's okay for me to actually express this trauma. Oh shit, I don't just need to like turn it off like a light switch.
The metalheads are the ones who seek out music with screaming and tritones because it puts them on edge, and it's like teaching you how to unlearn trauma responses. Well, yeah, we just talked about metal music as horror. All metal's got some sort of base element of horror, but it's because it's such a pervasive thing, it's easy to train yourself out of. Now, the other music that comes to mind that we've been talking about that strives to be horrific in certain iterations is industrial. Of course, as you know, if you listen to this podcast, industrial music came out of the punk scene. It was a attempt to be more punk than punk, appropriate any kind of sound you can, try not just to confront listeners with sonic violence, but to actively frighten listeners with sounds they're not used to hearing, with visuals that are disturbing. A lot of early and contemporary industrial acts incorporate horror visuals because it's part of the experience. And this ties into horror hip-hop, industrial hip-hop. The acts we've been naming, like Clipping, like Death Grips, on their Wikipedia article, they've got industrial hip-hop next to them. Because it's the same attitude of like confrontational sound design, stuff that's designed to be antagonistic towards the listener. And that tends to manifest as horror, as inducing anxiety, fear, disgust, things you don't want to hear. But that's the paradox of horror. It's a genre, it's a attitude designed around unpleasant experiences.
It's like the difference, if we're talking about those, like, again, going back to the things talking about horror and things that actually are horror. That's like, an Aaron Beauregard book compared to like a Lovecraft book or something. It's like the language you use. Like, yeah, Aaron Beauregard is describing atrocious things, but he's just directly saying the words. He uses the word come at least like 8 times in a book. Whereas that's like his language isn't scary. It's the things he's like saying. But whereas Lovecraft he's crafting this environment that you're now living this framework. And you have to go into that framework fully accepting, okay, the box has been put around me for this song. This is the world I'm living in now. Let me actually embrace what this world is. And if you're actually living in that world while you're listening to the song, yeah, it's terrifying. Like, that's why you have to sometimes be in the right setting to hear a lot more of these industrial artists, because they're crafting just this thing.
Maybe an even better comparison, which I talked about William Burroughs a little bit in the previous session, but I cut it out because it's hard for me to formulate thoughts on William Burroughs. It's sort of the nature of his writing is to defy language. And that's what I would call writing that is structurally horrific. He is known as one of the pioneers of the cut-up technique, where you write like crazy and then you cut up your page and rearrange it. You've got like all the words themselves are still there, but it's scattered. It's the David Diggs impression Zach was doing earlier. That's the kind of vibe of it. But the reason I bring this up is also because William Burroughs is a huge influence on early industrial music. His cut-up technique was one of the inspirations for industrial artists sampling music, sampling films, horror films especially, and remixing it all into something that is structured after a pop song, but that doesn't entirely make sense. The sounds that you're not expecting to encounter in a musical experience. Things that sound like nails on chalkboards.
Which sometimes are nails on chalkboards.
Microphones on glass.
Beards on microphones. Would it go into a little bit of what you were just saying about how industrial like noise is just unnatural? Like humans recognize it as being unnatural, like compared to like, your example that you just use a woodpecker versus like a jackhammer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the nature of industrial music is to make you uncomfortable because of just human instinct to like be naturally uncomfortable around like industrial music. It's a little bit of what Slipknot does, but they don't lean into it as much as Nine Inch Nails and like a lot of other like more like industrial like metal bands or just industrial bands. There's industrial Music that is not industrial metal. It's just industrial or like other genres.
Industrial is a
Blanket.
applies one to a specific like post-punk scene in the late 70s,
Yeah.
early 80s. I don't know if you listened to any of the Throbbing Gristle I sent you.
I did listen to it a little bit.
Yeah, Throbbing Gristle is horror music, like straight up unadulterated. And then a lot of the industrial rock bands in the 80s, 90s picked up on that train of thought and just added guitars and slightly poppier sound. And Nine Inch Nails is incredible, one of the greatest industrial acts of all time, because they were able to take this horrific sonic palette and make it accessible, make it radio rock. So some of their most popular songs aren't necessarily what I would call horror music, but the like casual listeners of Nine Inch Nails probably have heard March of the Pigs, which is one of the
Yeah.
scariest songs I've ever heard.
Really?
Yeah, the combination of the irregular time signatures and like obviously screamed vocals, but then we mentioned this briefly, the like uncanny sort of happy chords in the chorus.
Honestly, like the end isn't even the scariest part. It's just the random. Doesn't it make you feel better?
Awkward pause.
Well, also to me, like industrial music, what very good industrial artists do, is, like Nine Inch Nails, is they appropriate industrial sounds. Like it's kind of taking the power back from, okay, we've created these things that make these sounds, taking away from the nature like soundscape. We're not just like echoing wind through a like pipe that's making a sound or a pitch. Like these are just things that make sounds, and it's saying, well, screw that object that's like noise polluting. We're going to turn you into something that is ours, that causes us joy. And it's so taking like the over industrialized concepts and world and being like, yeah, this is our shit. Listen to it.
Yeah, and you can trace that back to the Italian futurist movements in the early 20th century, where like all our music is made up of things that we have no relation to. We have no attachment to violins except because it's encultured. Like this is an easy way to make a pitch, but why are we prioritizing pitches and harmonies when the sounds around us are machines, are guns? They lived through World War I. They had opinions on World War II, which is why we don't hear much about the Italian futurists, but they were very much into the sounds of war as a musical ideal. Guns, screaming, and this is the roots of the industrial movement is here. It's the idea that the sounds we surround ourselves with, we can reclaim those and make them aesthetic ideals.
Forward by Anon Thrak. Forward.
Yes, extreme industrial metal. Machine sounds, a fuck ton of distortion, but combined with the depths of black metal, grindcore, death metal, it's the heaviest band of all time.
What's their name again?
Anon Thrak.
Oh, just two dudes.
I think it's worth saying that the instrumentalist of Anon Thrak, I forget his name, but his two bands are sort of a great example of the difference between music about horror and music that is horrific. Because Anon Thrak is horror music that's like designed to freak you out, but the lyrics tend to be like misanthropy, Satanism, just generic metal things. Whereas, what's the name of the other bands?
Watch Them Die.
Watch Them Die Slowly.
Yeah.
Watch Them Die Slowly is like black metal Ice Nine Kills.
Really?
Their cover arts are all a picture of Connor with a hat on with a knife. Like,
Wait, what?
I'm not lying.
Rorschach, metal vocalist.
Yeah.
Watch them die.
Watch Them Die Slowly.
Oh, watch them die slowly.
Or is it Make Them Die Slowly?
Oh, wait, it could be Make Them.
Yeah, their lyrics are all like slasher themed.
It's literally what their band title is what all of their lyrics are about.
Yeah.
I see one that's called My Bloody Valentine. I love that. It's also a good movie.
But if you like Anon Thrak, it's slightly watered down. Like there's no machine gun samples, flies buzzing on dead bodies in the World War I trenches samples. But it's the same kind of like cinematic black metal.
The melodies tend to be like less extreme, more accessible. It's like saying, yeah, the Ice Nine Kills of Anon Thrak. They're really accessible melodies for the most part. And that's why I got into them by accident, not even realizing was he Null and Thrack dude. I'm like, yo, their like instrumentals sound like a Null and Thrack, just with this different, more pop energy.
Imagine Null and Thrack covers of Monster Mash.